God has prepared this place of peace for us. Amidst whatever other clutter we have found pressing against us, we enter into it with thanksgiving. Welcome to worship in this continuation of our fall chapel series on Sabbath. Let us collect our hearts and minds in a time of music. Would you please rise in body or spirit and join me for the call to worship from the bulletin? We've gathered to worship the one who is our peace. The same God who calls us into difficult situations is also our source of help in the midst of challenges. So often we can turn to other comforts, even mere distractions, but God's commandments call us back. Serve no other gods, but rest on the Lord's day. With God as our master, we are not slaves of work. Return to rest in obedience to the one who set us free. Could we join in singing Obey My Voice, number 163. Our scripture this morning comes from 1 Samuel chapter 7, verses 3 and 4, and 12 through 14. Then Samuel said to all the house of Israel, "If you are returning to the Lord with all your heart, then put away the foreign gods and the Astartes from among you. Direct your heart to the Lord and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hands of the Philistines." So Israel put away the Baals and the Astartes, and they served the Lord only. Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen, and named it Ebenezer. For he said, "Thus far the Lord has helped us." So the Philistines were subdued and did not again enter the territory of Israel. The hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel. The towns that the Philistines had taken from Israel were restored to Israel, from Ekron to Gath, and Israel recovered their territory from the hands of the Philistines. There was peace also between Israel and the Amorites. As we sing our next hymn together in prayer, it'll become from "Come Thou Fount." We'll sing through once, but only the verse as written in the bulletin. Let us enter singing the word together in prayer.
I tell you what, Samuel needed a Sabbath for sure. 3 judges, Samson, Eli, and Samuel, represented during the time of the Israelites versus the Philistines. An epic, ongoing battle of God and ark, of land and possession, all shaken down into the hands of Samuel. This violent maneuvering went back and forth, with an underlying understanding that whoever's God was greatest would win, that whoever was the most faithful would win, that whoever held the Ark of the Covenant would have all the power. There are judges and promises of kings and prophets and unrest, everything, all the things, blood, gold, water, fire. Samuel needed a Sabbath, for sure. A plain read of the text puts a violent God on display. A violent God on display who plays into the stereotypes of one who strikes down the opposition, a mighty and deadly opponent, especially if you have something that belongs to that deity. Killing for reasons that are unfathomable to us today and our understanding of the way of God. But there it is, violence and mayhem, the ark and the people. Survival and possession seem to be key, and so it goes, and so it continues. In this little bit of the story that we plunk ourselves into today, Samuel is getting things straightened out. The people of Israel have picked up the gods of Baal and Ashtaroth, even while the Ark of the Covenant is under guard for 20 years. There is cultural confusion, I think. Samuel finds himself in a unique place as priest, prophet, and judge. Samuel is the last of the judges, a changer of an age, and will be an anointer of kings as the people seek to thwart the wisdom of God, thinking they know what is best for leadership. As priest, prophet, judge. Samuel calls the people of God back to their religion, back to their heritage, back to their focus, and forward into their future. 20 years of the confusion of Baal in one hand and Ashtaroth in the other, and not a third hand for Yahweh, incites Samuel to tell them to put down those gods and return. Return to Yahweh, and you will be delivered out of the hands of the Philistines. Samuel, priest, prophet, judge, gathered the people at Mizpah, where they repented of their sins of unfaithfulness, with a ritual of pouring water before the Lord. They drew water, they poured water, and they fasted that day. In Mizpah, a place whose name means lookout or watchtower, all of Israel gathers to return to Yahweh. Samuel the priest, prophet, judge, hears their confession. And the enemy finds out where they are. The Philistines hear that all of Israel is gathered in Mizpah, and the Philistine lords go there to strike them down. But the people of Israel are not looking out, they are looking in, and they are vulnerable, and they are afraid. Imagine they are caught and trapped, and the desperation surely rises. They call on Samuel, the priest, to continue to cry out to God to save them. Do not cease to cry out to the Lord our God for us. Cornered they were, all gathered there in Mizpah. In Mizpah, because Samuel told them to go there. And now they were being stalked and strategized against by the lords of the Philistines. Samuel better get Yahweh to listen to him and get them out of this. And it had better be the violent stereotype of the deity that shows up so that the enemy can know who is the more powerful and true God. Through the power of that confluence of priest, prophet, and judge, Samuel becomes the intercessor. His full-on determined intercessions are heard by Yahweh as they become an active salvific tool, a help like no other. If he stops interceding, Yahweh might stop hearing and the Philistines will win. If he continues, then they have a chance that Yahweh will be winning, and therefore their survival is in the raised and praising hands of Samuel. Not only did Samuel cry out in intercession, but he slaughtered a suckling lamb and offered it as a burnt sacrifice to the Lord that Yahweh would act. Through the water, the priest, prophet, and judge forgives the sins of the people for having turned away from God. And through the fire, the intercessor activates the answer of God. Through the burnt offering, while the fire is torched into existence, while the mewling of the sweetest lamb and likely the emboldened and angry braying of the mother hits the ears of the gathered, while the knife cuts the sacrificial flesh, while the dripping fat sends sizzling flares of flame to the heavens, the Lord is called into action. The Lord responds with thundering and a mighty voice that confuses and scrambles the Philistines, routing them before the very eyes of the Israelites. And in what had to be a frenzy of belief and relief and adrenaline, the Israelites, who had moments before been the vulnerable ones, pursue the already beaten Philistines, striking them down, finishing them up all the way from here to there. The smoke swirls, and the dust settles, and the noise recedes, and Samuel, priest, prophet, and judge, surveys the landscape, takes a stone, sets it up, claims it as a mark for memory, and Ebenezer because the Lord has helped us thus far. Friends, the violent, convoluted life of a religious leader did not end in that time before the kings. This is the life of one called into ministry, one who is called to lead, correct, save, serve, pray, who guides the people of God, who is a changer of an age. Like Samuel in the middle of the night of his 12th year, many of us have heard God's fearsome and lovely impulse within, saying our name. That moment of call, that call that others might have us ignore, but we've heard and we won't turn away from. That call into the wonder and hell and the mystery of ministry. We graduate from seminary with newly minted MDivs and MAs and are plunked down into the middle of ongoing stories in a congregation or an agency or teaching. We are seen as the priests who will intercede to the gods of congregational growth or budgetary windfalls so that those who have been serving can continue to make the choices that they have been making again and again while hoping for a different outcome if the one who leads just prays and cries out harder. A metaphoric read of this Samuel text begs us to name the Philistines of our living. Congregational arguments, bickering board members, narcissistic dissertation advisors, not enough money, downward spiraling attendance and giving, power struggles, petty differences, petulance when someone gets what they want and then decides that they don't want it, relentless work hours, making everyone happy, differentiating between the lords of potlucks, kitchen queens, board members, heritage, impending death, threat of survival, and the lamenting voices saying, for 20 years we've done it this way, even as that way leads to death. We are all called to be priest, prophet, judge, and we all need God's help. There is something about the use of ritual and intercession that calls us into the presence of God. Rituals that place us at the center of Mizpah and plunks us down before God where our focus is sharp. For we are the ones who also must confess at the same time that we are the ones turned to in a time of change, the ones pleaded with, the ones expected to prevail. Oh, there is something about the thundering voice of God that scatters our enemies. There is something about that moment when the outer and inner violence quiets and settles, and we survey the landscape of our living and place a stone for memory that the Lord has helped us thus far. Our stone of help, our Ebenezer. Steve Schweitzer and Christy Schellenberger, my living commentaries and solid guides when I preach the Old Testament, helped me to see that this help, this Ezer, is no inconsequential help, sidelined help, optional help. Ezer is not a word in Hebrew that suggests helping in the kitchen or picking up something that somebody else has dropped or any other of our daily helpful acts that we just wave away and say, oh, it was nothing. Ezer is not the help that comes from submission or subservience, help from a demeaned slave or maid. It is not a help that we take for granted or is expected and then forgotten as we move on with our day. In Genesis, when the first human is in need of a helper, the Creator does not create out of a rib one who serves at the behest of the first, does not create a helpmeet that is in submission to the other. God creates the new human who will offer Ezer. God creates the helper, who our traditions know as the woman that is later named Eve or Chava, which in the Hebrew means mother of all living. Azer, when used in our holy text, is no small thing. Azer is an action linked to God or a person of power and authority. It is a help that comes from royalty, ancestors, Yahweh. It is help that is like a fortress, a shield, deliverance, might, strength. Azer, help. The Lord has helped us thus far. Sabbath is our Azer. When we are pulled by the violence in our settings and psyches, by the vulnerability of hope and confession, we must put it all into the hands of the one who grants us Azer, a holy hope, a holy help, a great big lap of living that heals when our way in the world is in the painful throes of creation, a thundering voice that scatters the violence of human interaction and that would wound. Azer, when Sabbath comes, that day, or an extended season, our souls are often wrung out, our strength used up, our priestly focus unhinged, our prophetic voice like chalk dust, our judgments verging on personal opinion. I worked with a congregation who had been awarded the coveted Lilly Endowment for clergy renewal. $25,000, $15,000 of which goes toward the pastor, $10,000 which stays with the congregation, all to be used in that 3-month period. Part of the expectation of this grant is that the pastor will continue in service to the congregation for a full year upon their return from Sabbath. This congregation had a good experience. The pastor had a fabulous experience. 6 months after the end of the sabbatical, the pastor let the congregation know that they were taking another position elsewhere. Even in the shock and lament and grief, the congregation knew that this new position really was a good match. And so, with full support and blessing, sent this pastor on their way. So as the one who had been ushering through the Lilly grant and aware that there was this strong expectation from Lilly for the pastor to stay, I called the Lilly Endowment to make sure that all was well. I didn't want to have them come back 4 months later and say, oh, by the way, you have to pay us back the $25,000. I called. I was patched through to the director of the whole shebang. I took a deep breath because it was like calling God. Lilly is like that. And no sooner had these words left my mouth. I'm working with a pastor who received a Lilly grant but is now leaving the congregation after 6 months and wondered if there were any repercussions. When the director of the Lilly grant, on the other end of the line, went into a wailing lament. So deep in my gut did I feel it that I instantly moved into pastoral care mode for her. She cried in anguish, people, and said, how will the congregations want to apply when pastors keep leaving after sabbatical? I just listened to her for a long time. She eventually asked the question of me again, expecting an answer. So I responded, perhaps 7 or 10 or 15 years for a sabbatical is too long to wait. Friends, this capable woman who normally offers Azer to worn out and desperate clergy needed Azer from me. That was 8 or 9 years ago, and her wail and question still haunts me. What makes the Lilly Endowment and our own denomination compelled to write in their Sabbath policies that a pastor is expected to stay and serve for a full year after the return from their sabbatical? And for Bethany administrative faculty, it's 2-year expectation. It is written into the policy because when we are worn out and when we finally step away, when we finally take a significant break, when the smoke from the burnt offerings dissipate and the dust from the violent overwhelm settles, We can see the landscape of our own call, and we see that we hold the gods of busy and distraction in our hands, and it often means that it is time to get out. O ministering priests, prophets, judges of God, who will cry out for you? Who will open the channel from interceding prayer to the thundering voice of God? Who will call forth your Azer? In the Samuel story, the Ark of the Covenant was passed back and forth like the trophy bowling pin between competing youth groups. We're the champions. Now we're the champions. The people were striving for power and survival. And in our life, that striving builds, and the stress deepens and sharpens, and the exhaustion consumes and combusts until we are all at Mizpah confessing our bad choices. In ministry, just when you've put the sermon to bed, the hospital calls. Just when you visited the last elder for the week, there's a knock at the door from a homeless mother of two. Just when the budget breaks even and your not-for-profit ministry has 5,000 likes on Facebook, a volunteer is slapped with a sexual assault complaint. Just when attendance is rising and programs are happening and goals are goaling, planes fly into towers. Campuses and movie theaters become shooting galleries. Black men and boys are gunned down. Hurricanes batter and swamp homes. Beheadings fill the news. And abortion and death penalty folks vie to be the greatest respecters of life. And Syrian refugees lose life and babies into the dark, churning night of the Mediterranean. Violence and the struggle for survival at all costs surround us at our most vulnerable moments. O ministering people of God, you priests, prophets, and judges, who will cry out for you when you are interceding for the whole world?
During this hymn of response, as we sing our prayer of belief in a God who is our help, I invite you to consider raising an Ebenezer in remembrance. Samuel may have chosen a stone for the marker's endurance, but certainly also because it was an object readily available. If one of the items of the worship center speaks to you, whether reminding you of God's help or what God's help saves you from, perhaps you could lift that piece to the table. Or you could lift one of the many small stones, perhaps planning to raise an Ebenezer from your own life's things in your own space the next time you enter into Sabbath. In whatever fashion, reflect on God's help as we sing our prayer of thanks. may we find help from God and raise our Ebenezer, our everyday object, Ezer, or somehow be reminded of God's help. And with that help, may God empower you to face your challenges, rout the Philistines of your lives, and help you into Sabbath rest. Go with God's help.